Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we recap an incredible 2023 draft from General Manager Howie Roseman and the Philadelphia Eagles, all that and more on this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Monday edition of the show. Shout out to the everydayers listening and watching Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms. Even now, after the NFL draft, it's the dead zone of the offseason. Eagles training camp not until July, but we still got you covered 5 days a week right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm Louis DiBiase alongside my co-host, Gino Camilleri. And Gino, we're going to continue to recap just an incredible 2023 NFL draft from the Philadelphia Eagles. And I'm just going to say it now, man. I think they topped what they did in 2022. And I feel like this is the first time in a long time they did literally, at least for me, everything I wanted. Like 2021 even, I loved Devontae Smith, but I wanted the quarterback. 2022, I preferred defensive backs. This year, we got 2 top 10 pass rushers, the versatile offensive linemen, both a safety and a corner that we wanted, my guy for me at defensive tackle in the 7th round, and DeAndre Swift. I mean, I thought maybe you'd have a chance at 2 of Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Sidney Brown, and Kelee Ringo. The fact that you got all 4, just what an incredible weekend, man. I mean, I think they really topped 2022.
Yeah, when you just look at this on paper, I totally walk away saying, man, everything we had envisioned, all the positions that we had wanted, which aligned with what they needed, I think they walked away pretty well. And even over the last 24 hours, as this UDFA pool opens up, you go out and sign a guy like Eli Ricks in the undrafted free agency pool.
Gosh.
So
like
similar to Josh
arms, man.
Yeah, man. You just continue to find ways to win in the margins. And I thought day 3 was an exceptional day as well. And even the pick that they didn't make, right? They move up to 191 by trading away 2 7th-round picks. And then they move 191 for a 5th rounder next year. I mean, Howie Roseman, he never plays with his food, right? He's always finding a way to get his cake and eat it too, as you always like to say on this show. And he did it the smart way, man. Like, don't overthink yourself. Go Georgia. Let's go back to the well. Get a Bama guy. Yeah, and then we'll go outside of the norm, take an Illinois defensive back who happened to have
and then go
one
back
of the
to
best
Georgia
defensive.
Twice.
Yeah, and then go back to Georgia twice as well. And I even think the Ojomo pick, like, you love him as well. And they're just finding ways to just make selections that there's a report that GMs are being annoyed with how good Howie Roseman is. Well, folks, let me tell you what. Yeah, stop trading with him. Figure out a way to make those selections that he is making and just quit it with the excuses. And Howie Roseman, 1, deserves credit, and 2, at the same time, he's still not letting off the gas, right? Like, you could be okay with this and you could have played it safe and walked into this draft and say, oh yeah, we'll take Peter Skoronski. We'll play it safe, not draft Jalen Carter. Right. Oh, well, you did that. Oh, well, we already got a pass rusher. We could go and take an offensive lineman. No, we doubled up with Nolan Smith. Oh, Kelee Ringo is sitting there on the board and we have him ranked way higher than 105. Let's trade some picks next year that we already know we're going to get back and get your guy. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is, even day 1 was electric. Day 2, I was extremely happy when they got Sidney Brown. A safety is something I really wanted for this team, both in the short term and the long term. Day 3, though, you add Kelee Ringo, you give up a 3rd-round pick in 2024. By the way, you're probably going to get that back with the compensatory pick formula with that Javon Hargrave contract to San Francisco. That's a guy I thought was an option in round 2. He's 6'2", runs a 4.3, 20 years old. He can sit and develop behind Darius Slay and James Bradbury. I mean, even day 3 was incredible. DeAndre Swift you got for pennies, and look at how explosive and efficient he's been over the years. Day 3 was almost as good as the other 2.
Within just a couple of minutes of each other, you move up, and we thought we weren't going to be picking until like the 180th selection. Then all of a sudden you're picking at 105, the 3rd pick on that 4th round, because Howie Roseman knows that this was quantity over quality, or quality over quantity. every day of the week. And he did exactly that. And he still walked away with 7 selections, which I think is pretty impressive, right, Lou? And we knew going in that he wouldn't just sit on his hands. He only made 1 selection at the pick that was assigned to the Eagles coming in at number 30. I mean, right before the draft starts, he's wheeling and dealing with the whole tampering expectations with Jonathan Gannon. And I walk away saying you have to include DeAndre Swift in this class as well, like we did with Darius Slay a couple years ago when they moved to 3rd. Like, you have to account for that.
And A.J. Brown last year, Gino, right? And when you give up a first-round pick for A.J. Brown, he completely counts too. And so that's another Georgia player. That's also a St. Joe's prep guy that's from the Philadelphia area. So it's another cool story. And, Gino, when you look at that, you look at Swift and Rashaad Penny. They're both insanely efficient and explosive, right? Last year, Penny averages 6.1 yards per carry. Swift was at 5.5. Swift was 6th overall in Football Outsiders DVOA efficiency formula last year among all running backs, while both combined cost you a little under $3 million in 2023. And so you look at what the Panthers are giving Miles Sanders, $13 million total. You look at what the Falcons did with Bijan Robinson, spending a top 10 pick on him and paying him that kind of money. And guess what? Swift and Penny are probably going to be as productive numbers-wise with Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott. This is the running back approach, and I couldn't be more happy with that backfield now.
And we expected that they probably would make a late round selection on a running back, but instead you go and get a guy who was a high round pick that the Eagles 100% had interest in. They knew him coming out of high school. I mean, he's a Philly guy. If you don't think NFL teams are aware of those guys that are studs coming out of their area, you're just completely wrong. They leave no stone.
Well, he went to prep with Zacchaeus, by the way, too.
Oh, well, he went with OZ? No kidding. That's pretty funny. Yeah, that's a good school there, St. Joe's in that Philly area. And he comes in, and he is very similar to the approach of Jay Ajayi, right? And not the production that Ajayi had in those 2 years in Miami, but just like Rashaad Penny as well, if you get what you expect out of him when he is healthy, you got to steal.
And you'll get 17 games combined probably between the two, right? I mean, 2 injury-prone running backs probably equals 17 games, plus you got Kenny G and Scott, so.
You tweeted that out, and I thought that was a great way to look at it, right? And not only that, Lou, you have Trey Sermon, you have Kennedy Brooks. Like, the depth is there, and you're not paying them what Miles Sanders is getting. You're not having to invest an 8th overall or 9th overall selection in Bijan Robinson, right? And we always knew that was going to be the takeaway. And even in day 3, Lou, they stuck to their guns, man. Like, they went to a position that takes away the passes from the quarterback with Kelee Ringo, right? They drafted a quarterback in Tanner McKee. They're going to continue to go to that well time and time again. And they said, you know what? We already drafted 2 defensive linemen. Let's go out and get a freaking another one. They didn't deviate from what their plan was. And you look at what Detroit did in taking a running back and a linebacker in day 1, and then they turned around their draft a little bit. But Howie Roseman doesn't have to turn around his draft when he sticks to the straight road, which is the Eagles' philosophy of building from the inside out.
Yeah, the Moro Ojomo pick was awesome. He was a top 5 DT for me. Gino, coming out of Texas, I thought he was a day 2 option.
A freak, man.
Just one of PFF's most efficient pass rushers on the inside. You get him in the 7th round, and he's your 11th defensive lineman right now on the depth chart. I mean, it was such a fun weekend. And, Gino, I'm really happy about the backfield, but also the defensive backfield. We talked about Kelee Ringo already. The fact that he was available at the top of the 4th round is incredible. But like you said, Eli Ricks from Alabama is an undrafted kid who didn't give up a touchdown last year in man coverage. You sign Greedy Williams. You have Zach McPherson. You've got Sidney Brown now at safety. The youth of the defensive backfield, Gino, I haven't been this excited about the long-term future, honestly, since they drafted Sid and Zool in 2017.
If you go back a little bit, and this is for our everydayers that have been riding with us for some time, and you were on 4th and John just a couple days ago. But if you go back to the last time the Eagles played the Bills in Buffalo, which was 2019, if I'm not mistaken, because they'll play them in 2023, we had the 4th and John guys on our show. And I went back to that 2017 year, and I said, on paper, Howie Roseman did enough to support that cornerback group, to support that defensive secondary group. And there was a lot of young guys, and you're just saying we need the coaching. We need that next level to take them over the hump. And Gail and E-Rock had agreed with that statement. And now you look at it and you're saying the youth is better. They have better coaching in that building. The direction is there. They have 2 elite guys on the outside that can just be the next torchbearers for them,
and
like the master Padawan approach. Yeah, and an elite slot corner who's one of the most underappreciated in the position. You continue to take chances on guys in undrafted free agency and pay them big money because you want to bet on their traits, as well as investing in high draft picks for the first time in quite some time and going safety corner back to back. Lou, when's the last time we saw that? You have to go back to
2017.
2000. Was it 2017?
Well, that at least when they went back to back DBs, right? But yeah, not safety corner. Ooh.
No, that corner safety approach, you have to go back to like the Lito Shepherd draft, right?
Or was it
Sheldon Brown?
Was it 2011? They might have took Jaquan Jarrett and Curtis Marsh, but regardless,
regardless, not as good.
It's been a really long time, and there have been other draft classes we felt amazing about that didn't work out. I think we were both excited about 2019. Dillard, he didn't work out. JJ didn't work out. Sanders only got one contract, but this year, and maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe Jalen Carter flames out, and Nolan Smith's undersized, doesn't translate to the next level. But when it comes to like on paper what they did right now, it's not just us that's hyping up this Eagles team. Every national media outlet is saying they crushed it. Other teams, I'm getting texts from other friends that are fans of teams being like, why does Howie get it and my team doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
So right now it feels good to be an Eagles fan for sure. I think they crushed those 3 days of the NFL draft. We'll continue to get into more takeaways from the 2023 NFL draft from the Eagles perspective. Coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, got some culture talk. I think they're building an incredible culture, Gino, and this draft continued to emphasize that. So we'll get into that coming up next.
Before we do that, this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Built Bar. If you don't know what Built Bar is yet, it is the most delicious and nutritious protein bar on the market. They have two types of bars. They have their original Built Bars and their Built Bar Puffs, which are filled with delicious marshmallow. And all of them are covered with 100% real dark chocolate. They focus on the taste rather than the nutrition, but at the same time, the nutrition is just as good as any of those chalky bars that you'll find out there with 130 grams of calorie, 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein, rather. If you're on the run, if you're hosting a podcast, you're hosting a 4-hour draft stream, and you need something to keep you going, go and get one of the better tasting Built Bars that they have now. We've been telling you to go to Built.com for the longest time to get your favorite bar. You can still do that, but if you're on the go and you see a Walmart, you see a Sam's Club, and you have a membership, you could go there as well. Go to Walmart to get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puff. Or if you go to Sam's Club, you could grab a 13-bar box with their hit flavors of brownie batter puff and churro puff as well. Make sure you go to checkout Built.com. You won't regret it. Grab one of their delicious flavors. I'm going to snack on a churro after this episode. We appreciate Built Bar for sponsoring this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Shout out to the everydayers Monday through Friday, hanging out with us during the regular season, the playoffs, the Super Bowl, the offseason as well. We are now post-draft heading for some fun things coming up. The schedule releases May 11th. Also, the Kelly Green jerseys, I'm sure could come out at any point. Hopefully that's in May or in June as well. So still some exciting things before training camp, but the 2023 NFL draft is officially over. The Eagles, I think, crushed it. Gino thinks they crushed it. Most of the United States thinks that they crushed that draft. And there has been some talk about, are they going a little bit too overboard, Gino, with how many Georgia players they've taken, right? Because you go Jordan Davis last year, Nakobe Dean. This year you bring in Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Kelee Ringo, even DeAndre Swift, who you trade for, went to Georgia before he was drafted by the Detroit Lions. But I don't know, man, not only because these are the best players available at the best schools, so I don't hate this strategy at all. I'm glad Howie's not getting too cute anymore, but I love the culture aspect of it too. Like the Eagles right now have one of the closest locker rooms in the NFL. And I think when you add more former teammates that have these bonds, that have been through war together, that have won championships together, not just the Bulldogs, but the Bama connections, right, with Hurts and Devontae Smith. You see at prep, Zacchaeus and Swift were teammates in high school. Even like the friendships of Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. I think this should only make these cultures even stronger, and it's going to help guys like Jalen Carter, who has some unknowns off the field. So I don't hate the strategy from a on-the-field perspective, but the culture part I think really helps it too. And I don't think he's forcing it like, Chip Kelly would with Oregon, taking Josh Huff in the 3rd round. This isn't forcing the issue. Nolan Smith at 30, that's just BPA.
Without a doubt. And if you just look at it from just the perspective of this is an individual who's moving from a university where he was surrounded by his friends. He was the king of the castle, right? And he's coming to a brand new city that they've never been in before. And they had a little thing on the Eagles website talking to James Palmer. Both Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter were saying, yeah, we don't know like the food from Philly. We're going to have Jordan Davis show us around. Just think of that. You go to a new place. Yeah, you're surrounded by your best friends. I think of Fletcher Cox coming like from Wazoo City, Mississippi, like this small little town that has like a couple thousand people, and he plays at Mississippi State, and then he comes to this big city of Philadelphia. I'm sure that wasn't an easy adjustment, and you have all of your best friends there, right? Like that's an easy thing to say, oh, boys, what are we doing tomorrow? Like, hey, can we stay at your place? Like, it's easy to just go up there now, and you got 5-6 of those Georgia Bulldogs rolling together. And above everything else, Lou, this isn't like a Jalen Reagor pick where the culture at TCU is like, hopefully we win the Big 12. Like that'd be cool, right? Like with Oregon, it's hopefully we win the Pac-12. At Georgia, day one, when you're on a recruiting trip, the only message is we are winning national championships. And if you listened to those phone conversations that Howie Roseman had with those Georgia guys, he kept saying the goal is the same. Get confetti on your head at the end of the year.
Yep.
That's the goal. The goal is to win. And those guys won multiple national championships. And Jalen Carter came up huge. And Kelee Ringo sealed the natty over Alabama 2 years ago. And Nolan Smith continued to come up big. And so did Jordan Davis. And so did Nakobe Dean. So to think going to the school that is the best in the last 2 respective years to draft
and
players from that school.
Gino, like statistically, they're one of the best defenses, if not ever.
Right. Like, look at LSU with that Joe Burrow group, right? Like, you just go to that well. Let's draft those receivers that made Joe Burrow the guy he was, who were also exceptional receivers in their own right. It's just one of those things that you do. And I think one of the most underappreciated aspects of taking players from Georgia, from Alabama, is knowing how easy it will be for them to transition to a pro-style offense. Because if you look at defense specifically, Nick Saban and Kirby Smart wrote the book on what these defenses, not just in college, not just in high school, in the NFL are doing.
Yeah, and look at like the offensive line of what Tyler Steen was doing at Alabama. That's going to translate pretty damn well to Jeff Stoutland.
Yeah, I mean, Stoutland was an offensive line coach at Alabama. If you don't think he knows everything that is taught in that building, exactly when it comes to technique, when it comes to assignment, when it comes to being able to pick up stunts, when it comes to being able to pass off, he knows all of those protections, which are pro-style protections, which are going to make it easier going to the NFL. And that was the thing with Jalen Reagor, right? You go from TCU where you don't have this deep route tree. You're not running a lot of NFL concepts. It's more spread. That's a big adjustment. That takes a while. You're not just going to a new place and competing against better talent. You're learning an entirely new language. It's like trying to learn Mandarin Chinese, right? Like some of these defenses are 30, 40, 50 pages. I mean, even beyond that deep of playbooks to go from that style in college where you already have a good baseline to the NFL makes it that much easier. So talk about the culture, you talk about the education, and you talk about the ability to play against those matchups. Any scout
just the actual talent too.
Yeah, the talent. Turn on tape when they're playing NFL players. That's what Jalen Carter does. That's what Tyler Steen did. Look at the pass rushers he's going against. I mean, you just go to the well of good football players. There's no such thing as drafting too many good ones.
Yes, and you don't get tunnel vision, just say any Georgia player I'm taking, because there are busts all the time at Alabama. There are busts all the time at Georgia and some of these top schools. And sometimes there's studs. I mean, look where Jeremy Chin went to school, and look where some of these quarterbacks went to school. Obviously, you don't have this tunnel vision approach of we're only taking players at these top schools. You know, anybody that went to a small school is off the table. I mean, look at Tariq Woolen last year with the Seattle Seahawks, went to UTSA. So, you know, if that was the approach from Howie Roseman, I would say I think he's making a mistake, but I don't think that's what it is. You know, I think it's a huge part of it now, though. I think he used to make things so difficult, and now he's like, the draft is very unknown. I'm just going to take shots at places where the best players play against the best competition, and I like that. But again, that's not his only reason for drafting Jalen Carter. It's also the physical traits, right? It's the position that he plays. It's how he translates to this team. So I think that all comes together really well. And I'm not going to complain about them taking Alabama and Georgia players. I think it's worked over the last 2 years. And so I think you just keep going back to what has worked. And so I think they look really good. And, you know, 2022, that was the best roster in Eagles history. And I'm not saying this year's team looks better. I'm not saying they're going to be better. I mean, last year, again, yeah, I think even better than 2017. But I will say, man, the upside of this team, it's almost as good, if not better, when you look at what they've done on both sides of the ball.
The ceiling. Like, what is that ceiling, man?
Like, the floor is probably lower, but the ceiling is, I think, higher.
Yeah, because if all of these guys come out and play right away and they're instant impact players, you hit this one out of the park. And I think Sidney Brown has a chance to be arguably the one safety who gets the most reps in that defensive secondary because he can do just about everything for you. Jalen Carter is going to come in right away and be in that rotation. Nolan Smith is going to take that job of Patrick Johnson and Kyron Johnson and push them down the depth chart. And right away, you're saying we already have a good baseline of what you had walking in. Like, let's go back to Wednesday. What you just had on the defensive line is good enough to win many football games. But now the potential is even higher. You have all these ingredients now that you grab from the store. You're saying, what is this dish that we can create? Can you top that defense with a better defensive coordinator, in my opinion? I think Sean Desai is better fit for Philadelphia when it comes to, I just think, overall scheming these guys. Like Jonathan Gannon was a first-time coach, first-time coordinator. Desai has been around good-time football. He's been around Pete Carroll, who is one of the defensive gurus of the National Football League, and he's going to bring that in with now all of these players who are basically a ball of clay on that defense. And you lose Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and TJ Edwards, and the list goes on and on. We know that. But those guys, I mean, you could say they're all
outside of Javon
level
Hargrave
players,
and
CDJ.
Yeah. And that's my thing is you look at, is Sidney Brown going to be as good as CGJ this year? Probably not. Is Jalen Carter going to instantly replace the production of Javon Hargrave? I think he could, but it's not guaranteed. Are Dean and Moro going to be as good as White and Edwards? Again, no guarantees. But I think the floor is lower with these players just because we haven't seen a lot of them because they're so young. But again, the ceiling, Jalen Carter could be just as good as Javon Hargrave. I think Kendavius Street and Moro Ojomo could be better than Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph. Nolan Smith is a massive upgrade over what you had in Robert Quinn last year. Sidney Brown could be a lot better than Marcus Epps. You look on the offensive side of the ball, DeAndre Swift and Rashaad Penny probably going to do just as much as Miles Sanders did last year when you combined all of their production. So again, the guarantees of them being 2022, it's not there, but the potential is maybe even higher. So I think that's really exciting.
And with the culture and with the draft picks, and I just think it's smart. You're not out thinking yourself. And
you have so many core pieces still of last year's team that are still here. I mean, so many.
Yeah, and the combination of everything, the 13-year-long vets and Jason Kelce, and seeing Jason Kelce just absolutely demolish some beers at the NFL draft after they draft Jalen Carter, that's what it's all about, man. Like the buy-in. You always feel that this team is a team and they have that goal. You see there's teams in the NFL that, they punt seasons away. The Eagles will never purposely punt a season away. There's always a will, a reason, and a backing to why they are doing things. And to see them continue to go to the best conference in football and continue to draft players from there, from buildings that have high cultures, it's the recipe for success. There's a cliche in college football. The Big Ten, they're big and strong. In Big 12, they're big and fast. In the SEC, they're big, strong, and fast. And you're getting those guys that are going to instantly come into the National Football League, played against the best. Why can't Jalen Carter be in the discussion for Defensive Rookie of the Year? Why can't DeAndre Swift be in the conversation for Comeback Player of the Year? If these guys come back healthy and these guys pick up the system quickly, which you aren't going to have to force them in like a Danny Watkins, let's say. Not that the potential was there, but he had to play right guard right away. You don't have to force these guys to play right away, and they can learn behind some of the best in the entire history of the franchise when it comes to culture, leading, weight room, film. Man, it's a great formula to have all these guys together.
All right, we're wrapping up this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, taking another look back at an incredible job from Howie Roseman during the 2023 NFL Draft on all 3 days. And he was busy, Gino. Obviously, he stood pat. I was surprised at 30 and just took Nolan Smith, but to get Jalen Carter at 9 overall, he traded up. Day 2, he trades down with, I believe it was Houston, correct? And then he moves down to take Tyler Steen with Alabama. And then day 3, he makes multiple trades. He moves up for Kelee Ringo. He moves down from 190. He trades for DeAndre Swift. And you mentioned it in segment 1 that some general managers the report is they're getting annoyed about how much praise Roseman is getting from fans, media members, and, other teams alike. But to me, then stop trading with him because he always wins these trades. And number 2, I think he deserves the praise. I mean, Howie Roseman, teams and people are always like, how come we didn't think of trading for DeAndre Swift? How come we didn't think of making that move? And I still think it's because even in a much more aggressive NFL, where you see a lot more player movement, trades are a much bigger part of the league than they used to. I mean, go back even 5-6 years ago, before 2016, like when Chip Kelly was the GM of the Eagles, there weren't really many trades, or at least big trades, right? You weren't seeing A.J. Browns getting moved and so many quarterbacks getting traded. But even in a more aggressive league, trades are still a much bigger part of Howie's overall process compared to these other general managers, where I think it's still a side piece where they go through their entire process and then say, okay, what else could we do maybe with like a trade? Where Howie is constantly working the phones, and it's such a main part of who he is and how he builds a team. And that's why he's first to the table when a DeAndre Swift is there. He sees Gibbs go to Detroit and he's like, maybe I can get DeAndre Swift. I don't think other GMs still think like that. Maybe because they come from an older school approach, but I think that's a huge reason. Like, trades are massive, and he's been doing this since he came back since 2016.
The last night of the draft, our friend over at Locked On Cardinals, Alex Clancy, replied to me on Twitter saying that a lot of luck is involved in playing general manager. And I said, well, if you look at the decade of Howie Roseman, you can't say that his past experiences don't play a big role into why he takes the aggressive approach that he does. One, he was in the back corner of the NovaCare complex and had next to zero say when Chip Kelly was there. And then after that, which was essentially a decade ago, he turned this franchise around in the blink of an eye to get rid of the mistakes of Chip Kelly, bring in potentially a franchise quarterback who got you to a playoff run, to get you to a Super Bowl within 2 years of one of your worst seasons ever. And then when you do have another bad season, he turns it around again. His experiences that failed him allow him to change his paradigm to find new ways to succeed. And there's a reason he is one of the longest tenured general managers in the National Football League. And there's guys who come and go all of the time because Howie Roseman, he lives, he learns, and he's aggressive. But he takes cautious aggressiveness. He's not mortgaging the future. He's winning in the margins.
Right.
Look at the movie War Dogs.
DeAndre Swift,
money in the crumbs, baby. Money in the crumbs. It's always in those marginal type of moves. And yes, luck does come into it. But a team could have taken Jalen Carter with any of the 8 picks before them. Any of the 29 picks before Nolan Smith could have taken Nolan Smith. I don't want to hear that Nolan Smith was worse than, let's say, 15 guys. He's a top 10 pick that the Eagles had in contention to take at 10. And Jalen Carter was arguably the best guy, but you take those risks because you've seen your failed experiments of Jalen Reagor and the overthinkings of the J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. And you are now willing to take calculated risks that will put you in a position to beat the rest of the league. And I would be annoyed too if I wasn't doing it. But at the same time, why isn't my owner helping me? Why isn't my owner backing me, allowing me to do these things? That's what I would be frustrated with.
And, again, like you're saying, his approach is constantly changing. He used to be all about production, and now look at all the athletic scores of these kids that he's been drafting over these last 3 years. He's taking athletes at big schools, and that's not what he used to do. But at the same time, a lot of Howie's core beliefs are still there, and the positions that he likes to take, and he likes to be aggressive and constantly think outside the box. And trades are a core part of who Howie has been, at least since 2016. But even, being aggressive, you can go back to even the Dream Team. That's what he's always been doing. He likes to take big swings, and sometimes you're going to miss and you're going to get a 20-20. But I would rather have a guy that's willing to try to hit a home run than constantly just try to hit singles and doubles. And I think that's what this class represents too. Yeah, again, we might be embarrassed about this podcast in 2 years, like we were listening back to the Reagor pick, our reactions, or 2019. But on paper right now, it is really hard to hate what the Eagles did this weekend. I think they hit it out of the park, and they did literally everything. Again, it was so strange being like, oh, the Eagles should do this. And then they do it almost like they're following you, listening to the show. And that made it really enjoyable. So that's my final thought, is just man, what a weekend. And even though we're part of the dead zone now in the offseason, it's still going to be fun to do the show and take a look at this roster.
Yeah, they still have to clean up their undrafted free agent pool, which has been pretty solid so far. You'll see now more free agents being signed. I don't believe that if you sign a free agent now, they count towards the comp pick formula.
Correct.
So Howie Roseman is going to be very smart there. And at the end of the day, we have to give credit to everybody in that personnel room, man. This was their Super Bowl. This is what the scouts on the road worrying about 2023 when the 2022 season is going on is all about. And these guys don't get a lot of the praise. So hats off to everybody in that building. And above everything else, Jeffrey Lurie, thank you for giving this team the resources to go out and have a single goal, which is to win multiple Lombardi championships by taking calculated risks and getting gosh darn good football players in Philadelphia, baby. It feels good to continue to quote unquote win drafts. We'll see in a couple of years, but it feels good finding guys that are going to be long-term foundational pieces for you moving forward.
Yep. And it feels great, Gino, to not have an offseason where all year I'm not buying into the process like I was last year. So this year I'm back on the train and it feels really good for sure. And we'll continue to cover all of it all throughout the week, Monday through Friday, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Subscribe wherever you get the show, also in video form on YouTube as well. And always talking birds on Twitter. Hit us up at Locked On Birds, at DiBiase, LOE, and at GC24_football. Shout out to our everydayers Monday through Friday. We'll see you for a Tuesday edition of the show. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. And let's go, Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.